open the floor for questions for Craig, and then we'll open it up more generally for both speakers. So I just had a general question. So obviously the focus has been here very much on disease prediction and detection. Hidden in there, or behind that, is going to be also this issue of biological age.
Yeah.
Are you looking at that as well as a kind of a separate parameter?
Yeah, we can actually predict people's age from their genome from a number of parameters. So we get a biological age. They don't differ that much in general from the chronological age. But clearly some people, their accumulation of multiple diseases shows up much more obviously with increased age. But 60% of people are disease-free for the most part. So but 40% is a pretty large number. And usually if people have one parameter, they have multiple parameters.
Yes. Great. Okay, questions?
Hi. Hi, Christine Kiefer with the Finner Investor Education Foundation. My question relates to data. So I think that the genetic sequencing is tremendously fascinating, but people sharing levels of data about themselves and what kind of data security is being built into the development of these programs, because that, I think it's fascinating, and so many of us would benefit from participating in, the 40 MRIs and all these others, but I have a fear in particular about my data and my genetic data being out in the World Wide Web.
Well, it's a smart fear because my genome was the first one in history sequenced. It's been on the internet for a long time. I said recently if I was advising a younger version of myself, I would have said don't do that. But it's been helpful for science, and I'm in a position where it can't adversely impact me very much. But we consider data security one of the most important parameters. As we hear daily, it's hard to guarantee any computer system is 100% secure. We use Amazon Web. We use their HIPAA parts of these, which are more secure than almost any other system. But most importantly, we don't allow anybody to run algorithms trying to identify an individual in the database. We have a lot of famous people, a lot of movie actors and others in there with all their medical records, and so their privacy is something that's critical to them and critical to us and our success. So we have a large InfoSeek department that works constantly on trying to maintain data security. We're state of the art. Hopefully nobody gets that interested in trying to hack into what we're doing, but it's a critical aspect, and you should think about that because so many groups, including the NIH, are promising people they can de-identify their data and put it in a public database, which is clearly false.
Okay.
Dr. Vendra, thank you so much. Nag Odekar from Great West Financial. Looks like we are very close to truly predicting how long you could live based on genetic data. It's interesting, in coming in the financial company where we have a bunch of actuaries who do all kind of predictive modeling of, well, within the world of finance and insurance, it's like, well, for people who are going to live long, there are going to be people who are not going to live long, and that's how we're going to make money. It looks like you could completely disrupt a $1 trillion industry on the aspect of assumptions and life.
That's why you should invest in us, because we can do that.
I was hoping you could comment on that, please.
Yes. We're actually talking and working a lot. We have a lot of interest from the life insurance industry and the reinsurance industry. Your life insurance company wants you to live a long time. So you both have the same goal in common. And so some companies are actually doing experiments paying for their high-end insured to go through the health nucleus so they will improve their health if they have one of these cancers or aneurysms or metabolic disorders, that they'll do something about it and therefore live a long time. You don't need an actuary to do some of the calculations. One of the first men that we diagnosed with a high-grade cancer was in his early 50s. The pathology said that if he had waited even 6 months, he would have had metastatic cancer and probably died within 3 years. If he lives to be 90 and he had a $30 million life insurance policy, he probably had even a bigger one. This was a billionaire. It's not hard to calculate what 40 years of not paying out $30 million would do. Plus, he would continue to pay his premiums. So the life insurance industry is very interested in this, but they're also very concerned because, as you say, it can be very disruptive. We have people that want to go through the health nucleus before they go to negotiate for the life insurance policy, but want the data kept confidential. And so it's like warfare. If one side has more information than the other side, they can totally make choices. But it is going to be much more predictive. One major insurance company said if we could help make people live a year longer on average, it would be worth hundreds of billions to their industry. And I said, well, we're shooting for 10 or 20 years. He said, you'll kill us, because most life insurance companies also have annuity programs, trying to balance them out. And so what they would make on the life insurance side, they would more than lose on their annuity side.
So but let me just push back on the premise of the question for your comment, and that is, I think the number that has been put out there is that genetics account for maybe 30% of life expectancy. That is, if you take identical twins, there's still quite a discrepancy in ultimate life expectancy. So is that number changing? I mean, because there is clearly a non-genetic component that's going to be a hugely important predictor.
So identical twins are not identical genetically. And so we've been doing we have a large twin cohort. So in addition to what you get from your parents, we all have several hundred to several thousand spontaneous mutations that make us all unique. And I just got this wonderful book. It's photographs of twins, dressing them identically and trying to make them look as identical as possible. And they're clearly not identical. They're close, but they're not. And so twin studies are useful up to a point. Your genetics determines almost everything physically about you. Obviously, if you smoke cigarettes, you will have, that's the #1 environmental cause of changing your health outcome. So how we live and what we do also does impact it, but it all gets back to your genetics.
Okay, great. Next question. Okay.
Is it on? Lisa Clary Reale, the Annenberg Foundation. Dr. Austad, you mentioned the cycle of childhood career, retraining, and I wonder if you have any thoughts. We do a lot of retraining right now of displaced workers, but do you have any thoughts about how philanthropy or the private sector can help retrain this huge tsunami of older Americans?
I'm a scientist. That's outside my realm of expertise. I presume there are lots of people in this room. I'm sure there is a role. I'm sure there is a role, and I think it's really important. Like I said, driving a car is one of those skills, or driving a bus or a limousine. It's going to be gone in a decade. So retraining is going to be incredibly important. But I don't feel like I have any special insight into the best way to go about it.
Good morning. First, SCL, thank you for having the event. Very wonderful. Dr. Austad, a question for you as well. My name is Scott Barclay. I'm at Data Collective. We do really deep, early investing in compute and technology. But if I were to rename the firm, it would be Data and Empathy. And I'm thinking about aging. And Dr. Austad, I wondered from your perspective, when you look at that journey and how that journey should change, where are you excited on the role that the machine can play empathetically coming along
the aging individual, versus where are you seeing things and you just think, that's just hogwash?
I guess I don't really understand the question. There's a lot of stuff out there about aging that I consider hogwash, but I don't think that was the nature of your question. So could you maybe reframe and clarify exactly?
Yeah, sure. It's really a question. It's not a question of when and how we'll leverage compute and AI to assist people as they age. It's a question of areas where you're excited versus areas where you're not. So, to give two very brief examples, I've seen robots in the home of the individual, most likely a woman. She's most likely over 75. She's widowed. And the robot starts from a position of non-presumption and just listening and tracking, but really gets smarter and uses light and voice to be more empathetic and to start to understand her. And of course, what it's really doing is learning all of her patterns and finding ways to be both a buddy and connect her to people who aren't there physically. And I've seen several of these and I've thought, we're not there yet. I'm using that as an example.
Okay. All right. I mean, I think those sorts of things are wonderful, and loneliness is a huge problem of older disabled people that simply can't get out. And I do think it's not long before robots will be like friends. But I think maybe a different way of thinking about computing technology is how it can assist people in learning, in continuing to learn as they get older, and that will open up many other doors. A lot of older people these days don't know how to use computers, and that's a tremendous disadvantage of them. My mother-in-law doesn't know how to use a computer. She's been very, very resistant to learning, but I think of that as the computer's fault, not so much her fault. She's not demented. She's a person that's intelligent, but she just doesn't want to go through the degree of learning they have to. So I really think besides assistance, the assistance in learning is going to be huge. And the access to the rest of the world for people that are housebound or bedbound.
I would say that dogs are great robots that do much of what you described.
That's a good point. Although they tend to trip people, that's okay.
Ronak Trivedi, I'm at Stanford. In a society, this is more a question for Dr. Austad, but in a society where we're valuing independence so much, when we lose our physical abilities, we then have a shift of our value. What can we do to continue to value interdependence in the social institutions so that we can enhance the interconnectivity of society, improve social connectedness, decrease isolation, and maybe start valuing institutions such as grandparenting as a way to improve longevity and aging?
Yes, well, I think this is going to become more of an issue. I mean, one of the things that I often hear when I give public talks is, gee, we don't want to live longer. We'll just be miserable longer. I think one of the great opportunities for us living longer is more intergenerational interaction. I think it would be great to have 5 generations able to interact. I think we might think more about the way we restructure what some people call retirement communities. I think, again, that ought to be kind of renamed so that it kind of enforces interaction. The easiest thing for people when they lose some mobility is to sit in their room and watch television. Well, the television, at least so far, doesn't talk back, and I really think there needs to be, I guess, again, this is more a problem for the sociologists, ways to keep people interacting with other people as they get older, because social isolation is a horrific problem.
Yeah, I might add that one of the best predictors we have of longevity right now is muscle mass, not BMI. So the more motility you have, the more active you are. That's why getting too many robots in the home that do all the things for you are going to probably have negative impacts. Yeah. So weight training, anything to increase and maintain your muscle mass is one of the best things you can each do for yourselves.
Walsh with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, and this is a question for Craig Ventnor. I immediately went onto your website because I was so excited by, and I thank you for your presentation. The couple questions that I had related to cost. What might one expect to pay for sequencing their whole genome? I also noticed that the whole genome test appears to be limited currently to employees and customers of a particular financial services company or financial group. I was wondering about broader availability. And the third piece of the question is there are lots of ads out there purporting to sequence your genes, 23andMe, Ancestry.com. How do those kinds of companies compete with the work that you're doing, and are there opportunities for scientific results from those data?
So there's a lot of intermixed questions. You were looking at a special part of the website that has a deal just for one insurance company, but anybody can sign up if they're over 18 for the Health Nucleus, and there's a range of things that started out. The most comprehensive one is $25,000, but we tried to make it much more available, so we have one that starts at $4,900, and for the rest of this month, it's only $2,500. It does the whole genome and the complete suite of MRI techniques, as we're trying to bring in more people and more diversity and get more data. The biggest problem is in this country, people have no awareness of value and cost of healthcare. A BRCA1 gene test costs about $5,000 for a single test. We're now sequencing the whole genome for well under $1,000. And so for half the cost of getting a BRCA1 gene test that you're happy to have your insurance company pay for, you can get everything I showed you in the MRI, plus your entire genome accurately sequenced and determined that the BRCA1 gene is just 1/20,000th of the gene sets there. On your other part of, yes, there's a lot of confusion out there. 23andMe uses a gene chip. It doesn't sequence the genome. It measures probably 1/10,000,000th of what we do from sequencing the entire genome. Some companies just do amplify just the gene set and don't get all the regulatory regions. So really check, before you pay your money to do something, you should really try and understand what it is that you think you're paying for. We're the only ones that do the comprehensive, complete examination of somebody, that the genome, the microbiome, the metabolome is all part of it.
On? I have a question both for Dr. Austad and Dr. Venter. Hi. Yeah. Laura, I'm here.
Oh, no.
Hi, Steve. Can you each give us some sense of what you think, I hesitate to say medical care, health care, will look like given these technological and scientific discoveries in 10 years? So sort of the short-term future, how will our lives be changing because of these advances? And if you think the answer is no, then you can go to 20 years. But what does the future hold in the relative near term?
I think we should go in alphabetical order.
Okay, well, I mean, I think the way it's going to change enormously is the amount of data that will be available. I mean, it's going to be clear that having your whole genome will be the start of a medical exam. And the diagnostics, you'll probably spend even less time with your physician than you do now, but there'll be a lot of pre-physician workup. The big challenge to me is going to be finding physicians that are adequately trained in all of the new disciplines that they're going to need to be trained in to make use of all the data that are going to be available about you. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a very critical question. Initially, we wanted people to come in with their physicians. That rarely happens. And when people get just their 500-page genome report, not to mention the other 2,000 pages if it was all printed out of all the other data. Physicians in general don't want to even look at it. And I think he's right. It's a part of training. We offered to sequence all the genomes for free for every entering medical student at UC San Diego. And we had weeks and weeks and weeks of negotiations with the university over this. I take polls of medical classes when I speak to them. About a third of the incoming medical students don't want to know their own genome sequence. So they're going to have a lot of trouble in the future advising their own patients on this. Ultimately, the medical school decided and recommended that we sequence the genome of some cadavers, and they could play with that. So it's not moving fast enough to affect things probably in 10 years. We get a lot of resistance, even some well-known physicians that get actually angry because we're screening healthy people. And I said, well, how do you know they're healthy? You can't tell me you're healthy, but I can tell you whether you're healthy or not, because it really turns the medical system on its head. And I think the medical establishment is probably harder to change than the political establishment. And it's going to be driven by individuals demanding access to these kinds of screens to detect cancer early while it's treatable versus having it be based on symptomology. So it's going to change slowly, and it will only change because people demand it, including demand that third parties start to pay for it.
Okay, can I just add one question to that for both of you? So the data you presented, Craig, really was remarkable in terms of sensitivity of picking up disease, and in some cases distinguishing what you would consider disease that needs treatment versus a disease that doesn't. But that's always an issue with a highly sensitive measure of picking up changes that might lead to therapies that will, in the long term, retrospectively, turn out not to have been needed. It happens with every diagnostic test. How are you approaching that? And then maybe to Steve, kind of how do you see that issue playing out in terms of healthcare as we move forward?
So when CT scanning was first developed in the 1970s, a large number of clinics opened to do whole body CT scans. And CT is just X-ray. So it picked up every cyst, and we all have cysts in our lungs. We find lots of cysts on the kidneys and the livers. But the X-ray could not distinguish what they were. And so there were a lot of follow-up tests, as there are with mammography right now, which is just X-ray. And it's, we think these new techniques that we will have MRI to replace mammography in a year. Our tests with tumor prediction have been 100% accurate. We do see a large number of cysts. There's fairly good guidelines of a cyst. For example, a thyroid cyst is over a certain size. It's recommended that it get biopsied, whether we think it's benign or not. Because there's no risk for repeated MRIs, because we don't use contrast media, instead of biopsying something, we just recommend that people immediately either get an ultrasound or come back in 6 months or a year to see if it's changing, if it's not in a critical area. So I think these new tools change the ability to get accurate diagnoses from the beginning. Many of the things become lifestyle choices for individuals. So HBO has a show, new show, and one of the reporters decided to go through the health nucleus and report live on her experience. She also chose to get her results on camera, which is always a mistake. She was very young, in her 30s, looked and was certain that she was very healthy. but her metabolic studies showed that she had changes in insulin sensitivity that made her pre-diabetic. She had elevated organ fat, and she had a pear-shaped fat distribution, plus some altered lipids. So, her path can be following her genetics, developing diabetes, developing cardiovascular symptoms and dementia, or changing her lifestyle in preventing the diabetes from coming about. And we've had individuals that have changed their lifestyle very radically once they see the accurate information that's measured versus what we have to do now. We sort of make assumptions, and we use diet and exercise as surrogates because we don't know what's inside.
So I think data, more data is always better, right?
If it's accurate.
If it's accurate. But I also think there's a way of thinking about health that's individualized. That doesn't have to do with disease or pre-disease. It has to do with what your expectations are for yourself. If you want to continue to be a ballet dancer longer, then your idea of whether you're healthy or not is going to be far different than if you have no interest in doing any physical activities. You simply want to be able to continue to, I don't know, type at your computer or something. Now, your long-range prospects aren't so great if that's all you're going to do, is type at your computer. But on the other hand, if I were a physician, I was going to ask somebody, how do you feel your health is? That answer is going to be important to me whether or not, sort of irregardless of the data that we might have about the underlying disease processes that just may be beginning.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for that. So please thank the speakers. Wonderful session. Thank you.